Well, thank you for staying with us this Friday afternoon, and we'll stay with the increase in interest rates by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Apex Bank. And like I said earlier, an investment analyst. She's with Chapel Hill Denham. A friend of the house, Mr. Nabila Mohammed, joins me via Zoom to continue this conversation. It's good to see you, Nabila. Good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Petrol. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. Let me start with you as an investment person. I know when we expect figures like inflation, MPC, GDP, you always have projections. What did you expect the decision before we had the governor come up with 25 basis points increase?
So in-house, we had already penciled in a 25 to 50 basis points increase in the MPR. And it was largely as a result of a couple of reasons. Number one is the fact that we did see inflation for the month of October coming at 33.88%. Now, a further surge, if you compare it to the 32.7% that we saw in the month of September. So that alone gave us that, is one of the reasons why we had that belief that we'll definitely see an additional rate hike. And again, if we even look at the months where we experienced some form of disinflation, that's I'm speaking to the months July and September, we still saw the CBN, that's the Monetary Policy Committee rather, come and hike the interest rate by an additional 50 basis points. So all these gave us that guidance that we definitely see an additional rate hike come this last meeting for 2024. And it did materialize. It was increased by 25 basis points, and we now have the MPR at 27.5%, a cumulative of around 875 basis points increase all through 2024.
That looks like a very deep one. But this increase really seemed not to be reining in on inflation like a regular analyst would say. So if this policies or these efforts being put in place or this policy mix seems not to be taking us where we expect ourselves to be, what next?
Really, two things that I would want us to look at with regards to how we see the impact on inflation is the fact that there is what we call the monetary policy transmission mechanism, and it's something that really measures how much of an impact that any policy decisions would affect a particular indicator or economic indicator. And in this case, we're looking at hiking interest rates versus reining in inflation. Now, there is always that lagging effect with regards to when the decision is taken to hike interest rates and how it affects inflation at the end of the day. So we are yet to see that, and it's expected given that time lag that I earlier mentioned. That's the first thing. Now, the second thing I want us to recall is that hiking interest rates really addresses the demand side of inflationary pressures and not necessarily the supply side. Now, if we look at the CPI and the consequence of the CPI, that's looking at the sub-indices, what we see is that food accounts for 50% or 50% plus of the entire CPI. And we all know the issues regarding food inflation that are challenging food producing regions in our country. We have the likes of insecurity, there's structural issues, there's also the issue around flooding that have in one way or another influenced or affected food inflation. And if that very large chunk of the CPI is disaffected by all these challenges, it's definitely going to have a ripple effect, and that is beyond the control of monetary policy authorities. The major tool that they have in ensuring price stability from an inflation standpoint is largely hiking interest rates. So we really need, of course, the fiscal side of things to address some of these challenges that are plaguing our inflation. We're not saying that the demand side or demand pool inflation is not present. We have issues around money supply surging, largely as a result of exchange rate and the devaluation we have seen in the past 2 years, that's last year and this year. And that is really where we would see interest rates address some of these issues, but not when we talk about food inflation that is beyond the control of MPC. So two things. The first is that there is that lagging effect, that lagging delayed transmission in terms of hiking interest rates and how it's raising inflation going forward. And secondly, the fact that hiking interest rates is largely going to address demand pool inflation and not supply issues or supply reasons for inflationary pressures generally.
Brilliant stuff. Let me ask you this. clearly, your understanding as an investment banker, the CBN governor talked about stability now in the foreign exchange market. Before I go to my next question, really, I want to get from you. Do you think, I know it's been between 1,600, 1,600, I don't think it's been up to 1,700 in recent times, but it's been a bit steady for some months. Really, I think the governor said from about June or something. Yes, I see you nodding already. What do you make of this?
It has hovered around that level, that's 1,600. It hasn't, the official rate, of course, has not gotten to 1,700 in the last couple of months, but the parallel rate, of course, has been above 1,700. So we would say, yes, there has been a relative stability in currency around that particular level. And not if we see an appreciation today, the next day it's appreciation. So it is just hovering around 1,600 levels in the official market. So yes, I would say that stability has been there for the past couple of months around the level 1,600.
So that's pretty fair, right? Is that what you're saying, Nabila?
Pretty fair. If you're speaking around the fair value of the currency, of course, we still believe that the currency is undervalued at current levels, so would be expecting to see more FX-friendly policy and more mechanisms just to reduce the volatility that we're seeing in exchange rates first and see some form of appreciation in the long run.
Indeed, FX. Let's talk about petrol pricing. My first guest talked about that and congratulating the NNPCL on the reactivation of the Port Harcourt refinery. Now, petrol pricing effects on the masses purchasing power. This is very important to Nigerians. But how does this impact inflation moving?
So I would like to think about petrol pricing from two standpoints. The pricing that we're seeing is largely as a function of two things, and that is the global crude oil price, that's in dollar terms now, and as well as the exchange rate and how stable it is or how stable it will be going forward. Now, these two factors come to play when we talk about petrol pricing. Yes, it is laudable that we have seen the Port Harcourt Refinery come on board. We see a further drop in the pricing of petrol products. I doubt that, largely because, number one, we have seen that subsidy is entirely gone. And as I earlier mentioned, there are key factors that really we should consider when we are talking about petrol pricing. Crude oil is a global product and priced in the USD. So even the Naira for Naira exchange that we're seeing, Naira for crude oil for Naira that was recently introduced, is largely something that is still the refiners in this case paying the Naira equivalent of what it is priced in dollars. So the good thing about it is that it reduces the pressure, the demand pressure from these refiners to get FX in order to purchase the crude oil. That is one. Secondly, there's exchange rate stability. There has to be that stability in the currency so that if there is any refiners that are going to purchase this crude oil, they would be able to plan and know that this is the amount that they are going to be spending in order to purchase the crude oil from the government. So all these two factors really is what will really affect the petrol pricing, generally speaking. And if we're now looking at the attendant impact on inflation, we have seen that, especially in the month of October, it was sort of a carryover effect of what we saw in September, which is the jumbo increase in petroleum prices that we saw in the month of September. It's largely the reason why we did see it have a ripple effect on inflation for the month of October. And it is something that I feel that the masses really would have to come to terms with in terms of high petroleum prices, but would not, nevertheless, we would not leave out the fact that when other refineries come on board and there is that, there is more supply of petroleum products and less of us importing these products, refined products from outside, we should maybe see some level of drop in the petroleum prices. But these two factors I earlier mentioned really come to play when we talk about petrol pricing.
Growth rate projections and, of course, reprojections in recent times, considering geopolitical issues. We've seen a revise from the likes of IMF and World Bank. And what is your own outlook now? I think less specifically for the investment space moving forward, considering geopolitical issues too.
So for us in-house, we do expect a growth rate of above 3% for the year 2024. And we have seen GDP numbers on a quarterly basis quite better than what we saw in the previous quarter. And if we look at the same period of last year, corresponding period of last year, I mean, I'm speaking to the current GDP number of around 3.46%, which is what Q3 24 GDP came in at. So we are still expecting a decent growth, however, better than what we saw in 2023, which was around 3.74% in terms of the full year growth. Now, if you look at geopolitical tensions, yes, IMF did revise their expectations with regards to growth projections across regions and even across countries. But geopolitical tensions are something that, if not addressed soon enough, it could have a ripple effect on regions and spread to even regions like emerging markets. And how do I mean? The first is that it could sort of cause supply chain disruptions, and there are currently talks around tariffs that could have a ripple effect on global prices of products and commodities. And this could translate into a resurgence of inflation across regions, which is something that we have started to see develop markets experience with inflation, and we expect to also see that happen even with us here in Nigeria. So geopolitical tensions are something that, if not early tamed or early addressed, it could have all these issues that I mentioned on regions around the world, and that could have a ripple effect again on us. But generally, for now, what we see and what we expect is a better growth figure for the year 2024, better than 2023, generally.
Interesting conversation. But Nabila, before I let you go, though, I must take advantage of this. The president is in France, and we still see him trying to attract investment. Yes, and you're an investment person. What do you think about our environment? Of course, policy reforms. We still hear the likes of IMF still saying, yes, you are on the right path. Put this and this together. You're not doing entirely so badly. But my question is relating to how it will help us drive investments now.
So, as a president, I would say he is the chief marketing officer of Nigeria, if I would put it that way. But really, we have to look inwards and see how we can address and encourage or bring about an enabling business environment, even if we want those investments to come and stay for long. Yes, it is one thing to put our foot forward as a country in order to ensure that we are trying to give them the right ideas or notions around what they would definitely benefit or potentially benefit when they come to the country. But we also have to look at our issues locally and see how we can rectify or correct some of the issues that we are facing. We still have insecurity. We still have structural issues affecting food production, food producing regions, and just generally looking at the business environment. Let's not forget there are some conglomerates that have come up to say that they are exiting the Nigerian market. So as a country, it is important for the government to look at those issues that are really affecting these investments. And another key thing, in fact, one of the most important things to these investors or foreign investors is how stable the exchange rate is, how easy it is to repatriate funds. So all these are issues that they would have to address, or they will have to look into in order to encourage this investment. It's one thing to tell them, but it's also another thing to create that enabling environment, formulate those policies that are friendly, business friendly, and put in those structures that would allow these businesses to come and not just go after a couple of time or a couple of periods and just leave again. Want them to stay, want them to stay, and for them to stay, the business environment has to be friendly, the policies have to be encouraging, have to be there should be those incentives around policies for different sectors or across sectors, I would say. Yes, we like what he's doing, visiting and pitching the investment environment of Nigeria to these outside countries, but then we should be able to address our local issues here so that when they come, it would not be a matter of they are leaving almost immediately because there is one issue that cannot be addressed or has not been addressed.
Well, I must thank you so much again this afternoon. Nabila Mohammed is an investment analyst, Chapel Hill, Denham. Thank you for joining the program and making real sense of this topic of discourse. Do have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me, Mr.
All right, there. All right, now Mr. Fakai Joy is standing by for me live to discuss markets. Is an economic and capital market analyst.